So, hello everyone. My name is Yann Leroy, coming from CentraleSupélec in France. Since we are only 4 presenters for this session, the 5th one is not yet connected. So I hope you will join us during the session. So I propose to start this session about the sustainability awareness. So for this session, we have 5 papers. The first one will be presented by Fangzhou Dong. So Fangzhou is a PhD in Department of Industrial Design at the University of Liverpool in the UK. And his research focuses on the interaction of culture and design for speculative futures. For the second paper, we'll have a presentation from Giulia Scurati, which is a PhD candidate in mechanical engineering at Politecnico di Milano. The third paper will be presented by Jérémy Lévêque from Center of Management Science from Mines Paris. The fourth one will be presented by Mariia Kravchenko. Mariia is currently pursuing a PhD degree at the section of Engineering Design and Product Development, Mechanical Engineering Department from Technical University of Denmark. And our research focuses on the interplay of circular economy and sustainability in the context of manufacturing industry. And she is looking particularly into performance indicators they use for measurements of circular economy solution and as a basis to support informed decisions towards sustainability. And the last paper would be presented by Giulia Romina and Romina Santi. And Romina is a PhD student too from Design Department of Politecnico di Milano. And before that, she's starting the doctoral path for product design and subsequently earned a master's degree in design engineering at Politecnico di Milano. So for this session, we turn off all the mics and video except for the presenters. For the audience, I ask you to maybe post your questions for the presenter in the chat. We will compile them and use your questions for the discussion session at the end of the presentations. Yeah, that's it.
I would just like to add, will you says who is viewer's favorite now or later?
Oh, later.
Okay.
Just before the, yeah. Thank you, Yasmin. Just before the presentation. And for the audience, Yasmin Uranic is here to help and moderate the session. So do not hesitate to text message if there's trouble with viewing or hearing the different videos. So to move on, so the first paper is presented by Fangzhou Dong, and the title is Building the History of Futures, a tool for culture-centered design for the speculative futures.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to meet you virtually at Design 2020 conference. I'm going to present our paper entitled Building the History of the Future, a tool for culture-centered design for the speculative future. I'm Fangzhou, currently a PhD fellow in Xi'an Liverpool University, and this paper is co-authored by Dr. Sara, also from Xi'an Liverpool University, Dr. Dirk and Hannah from the University of Liverpool. In this paper, we propose a culture-centered tool named speculative ethnography to support the practice of design for the speculative future. It provides a guideline to help designers define the speculation through scientific imagination of plausible future. It ensures the effectiveness of design for the speculative future and supports its interaction with culture. I'll start with the concept of design for the speculative future. Using Dunn and Rabbit's illustration of future with probable, plausible, possible, and preferable coins, we define design for the speculative future that aim at sparking public discussions on a preferable future through imagining and creating a plausible future. We didn't use any existing terms like speculative design or adversarial design because we want to emphasize our focus on culture, where most of the existing interpretations focus on something else. For example, speculative design focus more on technology, adversarial design on politics, etc. But we focus on culture, so we propose these new terms, design for the speculative future. About our research methods, we take Chinese wedding culture as a case study, and here we understand culture as customs, behaviors, and attitudes of people related to wedding. We use research through design approach and include 3 design projects to propose the 2. 1 project is conducted by us, 2 are conducted by 2 student designers from my online design studio. The design topic of all the projects is Chinese wedding. We propose speculative ethnography into 4 steps. First, to choose any cultural component and explore the now, what's happening at present in the modern society. Second, to trace the past to find out what has happened in the history. Then, to generate trends based on the now and past. Finally, to speculate the future scenarios corresponding to the trend. Let's have an example of these steps. Now, it's very common for Chinese young couples to hold 3 or 4 or even more wedding banquets because their family and friends may live and work in several cities or countries. They hold several banquets in different locations to try to invite all family and friends. But historically, there are only 2 banquets at a Chinese wedding because in the past, people didn't travel a lot, so the couples, their family and friends are usually in the same city. Therefore, we generated a trend that the number of wedding banquets is increasing because the geographic constraints is being broken gradually. And therefore, we speculate in the future, there will be even more, like tons of banquets. And finally, we conceptualize VR banquets to make the future even more plausible. Speculative ethnography is mapped in the discover and define phase in the British double diamond design process. It supports designers to construct the speculation. There have been many techniques and tools proposed for designers in the develop and deliver phase for speculative design, such as diegetic prototype, fictional videos, narrative scenarios, etc. Designers are able to combine speculative ethnography and other appropriate tools in develop and deliver phase in the practice of design for the speculative future. I'll conclude my presentation by briefly explaining how speculative ethnography interacts with culture. In the process of utilizing the tool, we try to describe culture in a neutral position rather than defining some cultural aspects as problems and designing a solution to them. Instead, we reimagine culture scenarios directly corresponding to the trend we generate. But our speculation, to say the designer's speculation, is not the only way to respond to the trend. There are many other ways to respond to the trend we generate, so it's able to open up discussions and debates on the culture components that the design project stresses. That's all of my presentation. Thanks for your time. If you have any other questions or interested in my research, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move on the second paper. And as you know, during the process, reviewers were asked to rank the papers and select most promising one. And I'm glad to say that Giulia, you were rewarded as your paper is selected among the 10% best papers. So congrats.
Thank you.
And so let's move to the movie. And the title of this paper is Raising Value and Sustainability Awareness for Critical Materials, a serious game for aerospace sector.
Hi, Well, sustainability is not a game, but gaming can be very helpful to help designers in becoming more aware of the sustainability-related impact of their design decisions. So this paper explores how a gamification approach, and serious games in particular, can be used to raise decision makers' awareness of the value and cost implications of being or not being sustainability compliant when designing products and services. The prototype that you now see here on the table is named the Value and Sustainability Game for Material Criticality Assessment and represents the main outcome of a research work we conducted in collaboration with a major aero engine component supplier. Giulia, can you tell us more about the game?
Sure. As Marco said, sustainability is not a game, especially in the aerospace sector, where it is not simple to balance environmental, social, and economic aspects. Critical materials contain minerals that are scarce or extracted in conflict areas, and their price may rise in an unpredictable way. The use of critical materials is related to several environmental, social, and economic issues, but is also difficult to avoid, because some of them allow to have high-performance components. How can we support sustainability and material criticality awareness in the aerospace industry? We conducted semi-structured interviews with an aerospace company, involving 5 professionals from different departments and backgrounds to identify measure needs. Then, we defined the requirements for our serious game in terms of purpose, content and information, mechanic, framing, fiction and narrative, aesthetic and graphic. The purpose of the game is to raise awareness and support collaboration among employees, linking sustainability value and long-term profitability. The game is composed by a board, a dice, cards, and coins. Players play the role of aerospace companies, trying to maximize profitability. 3 different coins represent the economic, environmental, and social values. Coins are assigned in the beginning of the game, depending on the business strategy of the company. Then, they can be gained or lost, depending on players' decisions and game events. The companies go through every phase of product development, making decisions. Each choice comes with economic, environmental, and social costs. In the end of the game, all the coins will be converted into economic value, with penalties if the company has an environmental or social debt. Some decisions are affected or blocked by previous decisions. Sustainability-related risks and opportunities are represented by unexpected events cards that will present random social, political, legislative, or economic events. They may have positive effects on the company, for example, providing funding, or negative effects, applying sanctions. The effect of an event also depends on the decisions made by the company. K cards represent knowledge, meaning research investments that can also be good or bad. Dual cards represent the presence and actions of competitors that can cause a gain or loss of clients. Players can choose to buy K cards, while they have to pick a dual or unexpected event card when they stop on the corresponding slot. We tested the game at the aerospace company with employees, getting positive feedback. In particular, the presence of the whole life cycle was appreciated. The idea of transferring sustainability coins into economic value was found effective. However, the role of the moderator was very important to understand and play the game, that resembling reality is quite complex. Future developments include the improvement of the game design and mechanic basing on user suggestions and further testing at the company involving more employees. But of course, we would like to hear also your comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia, for this dynamic presentation. Let's move to the third paper. Which is entitled Model of Innovative Purpose for Responsible Innovations Toward Design-Based Corporate Governance by Jérémy Lévêque.
Hello, I'm Jérémy Lévêque, and I'm very pleased today to be able to present a piece of my research work carried out at the École des Mines de Paris as a part of my PhD thesis. This work deals with the perspective of governance mechanism for responsible innovation. The starting point of this research is the empirical emergence of new forms of corporations. They have recently been introduced in the corporate law of several countries, starting with the United States and France. They have been labeled as profit with purpose corporations, or PPC. In brief, the principle is as follows. First, the possibility for companies that wish to do so to give themselves a purpose, fully defined. And second, to include it in the article of the association or bylaw as a mechanism to lock in the commitment. What is interesting for us is we postulate that PPC is a responsible commitment since there is a need to innovate to overcome trade-offs, classical trade-offs, and simultaneously commit to all the interests at stake. From a design perspective, this is puzzling but stimulating since it means to write a long-lasting commitment despite the partially unknown nature of the objectives. So how to judge such the quality of a formulation? First, the literature has long acknowledged the fact that designing governance mechanism in situations that include unknown is difficult. In particular, the allocation of rights and resources is frequently discussed. Then the mainly used approach is to stress the importance of agreeing on the means involved. But formally, the corporate purpose is quite different from this perspective, and the change is very close to reverting back from procedural to substantive rationality in the world of Simon. As the content of the purpose is not reduced to the process under which a decision can be judged, but also contains the effective goals and constraints on collective actions that makes it acceptable or not. So we have been forced to admit that we do not have satisfactory model to qualify this innovation that is a purpose. This is quite consistent with our empirical observation. Then, how to diagnose and modelize a commitment in the unknown and how we should be formulated if it's possible. Then, what are the associated risks? As a research proposal, we rely on the formalism of decision theory, more particularly from its extension with design theories, in order to modelize the purpose and its implication on the decision process. We consider it as a promising lead since this framework have demonstrated their ability for capturing transformation of decision-making spaces. With this perspective, we used a dataset of current formulation from both French and US companies in order to first define and modelize the purpose as a mechanism for decision, present and future, but also in order to characterize certain good properties for the purpose through a better understanding of purpose formulation strategies. With this framework, we have shown that the purpose can be both seen as a decision guides, decision tools in order to filter decisions, but also a guide for generation of future events and alternatives. We highlighted some of the risks associated with current formulations, namely unexecutability of the decisions, cognitive fixations, and non-generativeness, but also unrobustness. According to this risk, we state that exploring and learning about the unknown appears to be an important condition for maintaining a strong commitment over time, in spite of all the changes of the decision-making environment. From a theoretical perspective, the main contribution is to open the venue for an evaluation of this growing body of formulations of purpose, and also to point out recurring difficulties that are facing companies. We draw a typology of purposes and propose to reread some of the observed current pitfalls through this decision-making framework. From a managerial perspective, we highlight some surprises. Purposes are not exclusively decisional, and we point out some specification for formulations that is able to encourage responsible innovation. Thanks for attention, and I'm ready, if you have some, to answer to your questions.
So let's move on to the fourth paper, and this paper, Mariia, is the second paper of this session that was selected as the 10 best % of the papers in the design 2020. So congratulations for this, and let's move on to your presentation.
Welcome to this presentation. I'm Mariia Kravchenko, and I'm a PhD student from the Danish Technical University located in Denmark. Today I'm going to talk about the logic of trying to understand how to develop a tool to support decisions in sustainability-related trade-off situations. Before going into details, I would like to say that this project is a part of a larger project run in the Nordic region called Circuit. In this project, we have several focus areas that try to address and help the transition to circular economy from different perspectives. As you could see, starting from business model innovation through material selection and product development to closing the loop in collaboration. And highlighted here, there is a sustainability focus area, which my project belongs to. Let us understand what trade-offs are. The first example could be that we desire to increase durability of our product. By selecting a specific material, we can achieve so. However, we are also compromising easy disassembly and recycling. Another example, we are desiring to increase recycled material content. By doing so, we realize that we might compromise product lifespan. And the third example consists of going to support a community overseas by buying their goods and products. And we also realize that by doing so, we will increase the greenhouse gas emissions because of air transport. So all these situations can be defined as trade-offs, where we, by making one choice, compromise something else. What we have discovered is, of course, adding more criteria or indicators covering social, economic, and environmental dimensions will require making decisions navigating trade-offs. But we could also see that trade-offs can arise either within dimensions, for instance, within environmental dimensions, between energy aspect and material aspect as examples, and of course between sustainability dimensions and aspects. But we could also see that they can arise on different levels, on strategic, tactical, and operational levels, as well as across business processes. Having seen the examples of trade-offs, we wonder whether there is a support that exists to support decisions in those complex situations. So what we have discovered that there was no support available to help navigating trade-offs in a structured manner. And it was also applicable not only for a product development process, but for business model development, for production planning, after-sales service, etc. This has led us to perform a literature review to investigate what criteria are advised for the development of such a support to navigate trade-off decisions. So far, we have come up with 4 criteria, which are by no means exhaustive, but they give some sense of how to conceptualize a trade-off support procedure. What we discovered first that we would need to enable elicitation of sustainability objectives and advise on the use of some tools to reveal trade-offs. Then we would need to enable evaluation of trade-off acceptability. How do we know where trade-offs arise and how severe they are? So we establish boundary conditions. We need to provide several prioritization principles in conjunction to possibly reinforce our decisions about the importance of some criteria over others. And then, of course, it needs to be easy to implement by industrial practitioners, also across business processes. So if you're curious to know more, you're welcome to read our paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariia. And let's move on to the last presentation from Romina, which is entitled Designing for Sustainable Behavior Practices in Consumers, a case study on compostable materials for packaging.
Hello everyone, I'm Romina Santi, and together with Graziano Leggera and Barbara Del Curto, I'm here presenting our research. The project is conceived starting with the role that the designer has today towards sustainability. Developing sustainable products, the role of designer is also to combine the shape, the material, and the semantic attributes of the product in order to design even the user's behavior. Analyzing the scientific literature on the theme of design for sustainable behavior, we see how the product design could be a vehicle to guide human actions. The behavioral aspect of the user plays a fundamental role in assessing the environmental impact of a product and is a methodological challenge for LCA approach. Imagine, for example, that through an objective LCA study, the product A resulted more sustainable than a product B. The sustainability of product A is then discussed by the consumer variable. Through user studies, possible to be different behavioral scenarios and evaluate them in terms of sustainability. The result is that the impact of the product A depends on the possibility of incidence of different behavioral scenarios. The case study in which applied research is compostable single-use plastics. On the market and in the direct contact with consumers, different products are emerging. They have different aesthetics and communicative impacts. Unfortunately, the most common cases are not similar to those in this slide, but so. This example of compostable bio-based products placed on the market pose a big question. Will the user distinguish them from the traditional ones? This is a point of fundamental importance, since for these alternatives to be more sustainable than the previous one, their life cycle must be ensured. It looks like a perfect cycle, but many things can happen during this life cycle. What would happen, for example, if the PLA product was not placed by the user in the organic waste fraction? This cycle would start again and became linear. Therefore, also for the evaluation of the sustainability of the bio-based and compostable alternatives, the behavioral variables must be studied. The evaluation of the different behavioral scenarios allow the designer to understand for which behavioral scenario designed for. In this research, the study started from the analysis of the perception of the packaging and its attributes, the study of consumer behaviors related to the end-of-life sorting in the way to design for compostable materials identity. Then the study has focused on the visual, tactile, and sensorial aspects of compostable material, as it is the main driver of their recognition. This was possible through the in-depth study of the user through panel tests designed to be an increasing level of investigation. These studies and the results collected in the paper have led to the identification of misleading and appropriate aesthetics attributes for compostable plastic through user perspective. You can go deep in the tests that led to the results through the proposed paper. It includes the study of material perception, consumer littering behavior, static association and gestures the user performs for sensory analysis interacting with the product. The verbal protocol allows also gathering more detailed opinion and observation, very interesting for a quality analysis. The studies, shown more in detail in the paper, have led to the definition of what are the misleading attributes and those that contribute to the recognition of compostable products. Thanks to these variables, a set of samples was drawn, and fortunately it was possible to carry out the validation test before the pandemic period and select the aesthetic variables suitable for compostable bioplastics. The main contribution of this study is to question the so-called sustainable alternatives, because as long as they really are, they must also seem so to the consumer. The designer has the role of designing ethically to guide the use and management of the most sustainable product life cycle. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Romina. Thank you all for these great presentations. So unfortunately, the first presenter is not among us. So let's move on the discussion. And for the audience, do not hesitate to formulate additional questions in the chat. So for first, we have several ways, methodological paths to capture first end users' behaviors in the first and last paper, but also requirements in the other papers, and the elicitation to avoid or highlight decision-making process during specific trade-off situations. So my first question for all of you is, how is the more convenient for, and regarding the case study or the sector in which you're working on, which is the best approach to capture and ensure that the end user behaviors or the technical requirements are well formulated by the end users and the different stakeholders? Maybe we can start with Giulia, if you're okay.
Okay, can you please repeat the question?
We saw two different approach to capture first end users' behavior for the first and the last paper, and for the other is more on how to deal with trade-off and how to capture technical requirements. And my question is, what are the best approaches, the most relevant approaches to capture and ensure that the formulation of these requirements or these end users' behavior are the right one? How did you manage to capture the requirement? Yeah, let you answer.
I don't think that there is every case study. I think it can be different. Sometimes it is useful to have a lot of data, and it's data that is easy to collect, maybe doing a survey, like an online survey. In our case, it is a very complex context to understand, especially if you don't work in that context, like the space industry. If you don't work there, you don't know, for instance, about regulations or all the standards that they have to respect. In our case, it was more useful to have unstructured, so we could have some flexibility with that we could get from the practitioners. But in other case, I think when you deal with consumers, like very diffuse products, maybe it's better to use, as I was saying, like a survey. It can be different, I think.
Yeah, Jérémy, can you tell us about that? Because it seems you work more on the alignment between the corporate strategies and the different layer of management and product design process.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the question of requirements are mainly to be linked to the question of trade-off raised by Mariia, which I think are a huge part of the process. Maybe is to be able to evaluate or to detect and evaluate the trade-offs at stakes, be it considering decision-making or
Mariia, will you have to give you a feeling?
Just to be sure, because there are many more questions coming in, but I would say that based on our empirical investigations, when working with indicators and companies and then facing trade-offs, it is about making decisions or ensuring that decisions are being traced, meaning that we need to be asking why those sustainability criteria that have been measured, why they're there, why they're important for the project. And there are many many entries for those sustainability criteria to enter the design process, right? They can come from customer expectations, they can come from legal requirements, they can also be inherent in the corporate sustainability strategy, right? So we need to make sure that we have a context, and then we build up and select criteria, and only then we can sort of create dialogue why those criteria are important, and then addressing trade-offs. We could also trace back, saying that how previous decisions basically lead us to having these trade-offs, and how can we rethink our design process. But I'll answer more because there are more questions on trade-offs coming up.
Yeah, we keep this question for the specific discussion. And Romina, maybe.
Oh,
Romina, it seems you are mute. No. Since you are mute, maybe just or maybe just refresh the page. Just waiting a few seconds.
Okay, maybe now it's better. No.
Oh, it's better.
Okay.
We can hear you. So
okay, perfect.
let's move on.
Yeah, I was saying that in my case, the discussion is a little bit different because also we started to the investigation at the macro, meso, and micro level, but we ended with the certainty to really identify what the user, the final user, affects in this choice of sustainability, because the final user in our case had a really fundamental role. But the other level, so macro and meso, so at the industrial scale, social scale, has been study together with the micro, of course.
Thank you. So let's move on maybe to specific questions to all of your papers, and let's start with Giulia. Maybe the first question, so I have to read the comments. Thanks for your presentation. Very interesting approach. What are the next steps with the companies? Is it possible to implement this kind of sales game with other companies?
Okay, so we had plans with the companies, and those plans were supposed to happen in March. So just the week we started with the lockdown in Italy. So this couldn't happen, but we were planning to have more tests because they have these huge department days at JKN at the company. So we would have test the game with more participants. So that was the thing, and then like to take it to other companies. One main requirement of serious games that they have to be very context related. So I think that we will need to have another study on a different company, but maybe it can be also adapted that by changing something in the game. Like for instance, we can keep the same product life cycle because it's similar for all the products, but we can change then all the requirements and the events that can impact.
Thank you. I guess the answers is also good for the second question. So for the third, have you seen any requirements in literature for games? And in that case, how do these relate to these game requirements you found at the company? And the second, game requirements can be similar for tools, method requirements.
Okay, so for the first question, I think that one main requirement is for serious games in the industry is of being related to the context. And then the other is that they should be very oriented to the result, especially when we have like serious games about engineering requirements. So we should avoid to have a game in which people engage and they just follow the flow, and maybe they engage in some choice or task for the sake of it because it's fun, but they don't think about the strategy. So they should be very result oriented. And then I don't understand much about what do we mean what do we mean by method or tool, like design method or tool.
I guess you were talking about the game requirements, but maybe also the same question for tool and methods to elicit requirements or to formulate requirements.
Okay. So I think the game is useful to understand more general aspects, but for a tool to set precise requirements, we will need much more to dig into technical aspects. And so maybe it would be good first to play the game to get a general understanding, and then to have a tool and set more specific requirements.
Good. Another good question, I guess coming from Jérémy, I think, is the game only targeted at professionals, and would it be adaptable to teaching sustainability in general?
I think it is adaptable, but the game is very complex, as you could see, because it contains a lot of variables. So if you don't know the specific sector, it may be hard to understand. So I will do something simpler for education, in my opinion, and less related to a specific context.
And a question from Yuri. So have you measured the effect of introducing the game in terms of sustainability of solutions?
Still, we were planning to have first to have a measure test with many employees at the company, but as I said, we couldn't. So I think this is an interesting future step.
And maybe a last question for my own. Do you plan to observe results coming from replay sessions? So I think you've done a first session with your partners, and you collected the final results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do you envisage to replay the game with the same person and the same role, and characterize maybe the difference between the results?
So we actually had 2 different sessions at the company, and some participants that were in the first session were also in the second session, but still few participants anyway. what I can say is that since the game is quite complex, there is way more understanding the second time you play the game. And this is why one other thing we wanted to explore is the role of the moderator, which is very important, and possibly also a digital game to play prior the board game so that you can understand the mechanism. So these are the two ideas.
Thank you, Giulia. Again, congrats for your rewards. And let's move to the Jérémy's papers. Got no specific question from the chat, but I got mine. And the question is also available for the first paper. So, but how can you handle the dynamic of the system value? Because it's the system value you are translated to into the company, and how to align that with the system value of the civil society and narrowly your customers.
Okay. I'm not sure I've understood well the question, but I will try to answer like that. My concern with this study is to try to understand to what extent a formal commitment, such as a purpose that is written in the bylaws, could be an effective way to explicit the system value of the company in order to engage maybe the discussions with civil society. So this maybe is a preliminary answer to your concern. That is to say, for instance, from now on, the main the expected value coming from a society is was to generate profitability. But with this kind of perspective, board of directors can say, warning, I am trying to achieve something else, pointing out some sustainability issues. For instance, some of the ones which have been presented in the other presentations. And with this explicitation of values, we try to engage discussions around how is it possible to access in the future, thanks to design or trade-off. So it's not it may be a question of alignment, but the alignment is a further step, is the alignment either trade-off or redesign, but my point is to explicit the conditions under which is it possible to engage discussions around sustainability issues in a corporate perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm clear.
I got another question because I get into your paper. So you propose to use Bayesian network, to propagate and simulate change propagation into your network. So can you give us example of governance decisions, management decisions, extended events, or a state of the nature you'd like to feed or populate into your Bayesian network?
Yeah. For instance, there is a few surprises that are stated in these purposes. I named the unbearable decisions, such as, for instance, working with suppliers that are not aligned with my system of values. This kind of decisions, this kind of commitment in the first place will lead to redesign the entire framework of decision making, since we have to yet understand what kind of values my suppliers are entitled to in order to be able to give the decision of which suppliers are welcomed or not. For instance, there is this kind of commitment which create new decision framework, and other kind of decisions are, other kind of commitments are on state of nature, and which can be, for instance, to want to achieve I don't know, a diminution of better access of education on a specific area, on a specific targeted populations, and this desirable state of the nature, which will have to have consequences on the whole decision framework process, and will have to be propagated on the whole on the Bayesian
sounds
network.
very promising. And my last question is, do you plan to use a use case, an actual use case in the company to validate your framework?
Yes, thanks for this question. The next steps indeed is to, this tool was a tool for diagnosis, and we were trying to analyze and understand what are the actual formulation strategies for purposes. And the next step is to design and try, and we have already tried in some actual companies, a workshop in order to apply some of the results of this study in order to specify some good formulation strategies according to the commitments these companies want to achieve. And for instance, we have worked with an insurance company, an industrial company in the food sector, and also a small company in the education area, and we had some promising results regarding these workshops. It will be the occasion next year in Design 221 to present it in another paper.
Thank you, Jérémy. So let's move on to you, Mariia. We have more questions coming from the chat. Let's start from the first one. Have you considered the chance of overcoming conflicts by radical redesign, facing off and managing trade-off?
Thank you. So if I could assume that circular economy design can be a form of a radical design, then I would also say that it is what I've experienced when companies trying to come up with circular economy solutions, and in their eyes, they were doing radical redesign. But the point here is to then make criteria apply to all types of concepts or conceptual designs that they compare against, or that they do use to compare their circular solution against. And I guess that's where the magic comes, because the more criteria we include in our decision making, and I'm talking not as much about the number, but more about the scope of like trivial bottom line criteria inclusion. So working with economic, environmental, and social indicators, and we could see that there comes like opening a magic box, because they wouldn't really they weren't really able to predict where trade-offs would appear, because for them it was something radical that could only be perfect, and at the end it could still show that while having this design, it would compromise some sustainability criteria, right? And I guess this is a perfect example saying that none of the solution is perfect. It just depends on our decision space, on how much information is available to us to make this decision. And what we aim with this trade-off support is more to create a dialogue inside a company, asking those questions. What is that we are aiming with this design? Is it to, like having this information that is available to us, how can we make a better decision? And then how can then we work on improving the decision in the next stage? So I'm just short here if I took radical design through the lens of circular economy. Yeah.
Right. The second question is, have you seen any examples of trade-off in your research that often come back, and can this be solved? Moving away from trade-off instead of selecting, and in that case, how?
Yeah, I guess it's a very good question, because we always expect that we come up with, again, the best solution. But so far, we also might realize that the more criteria we include, like the more diverse set of indicators from social, economic, and environmental side we include, the trade-offs might be inherent. And it may be a matter of our design, but it also may be a matter of our boundary conditions. What is that we are aiming with this design? So just to give you maybe a quick example, it wasn't about trade-off resolving, but it was about an internal dialogue a designer team was having when they sort of selected two concepts and trying to understand their performance. And then a few questions that were asked, well, looking at this performance, why can't we go with other design options? And then there was sort of a discussion saying, but because the customer wants. And then the next question is, but why the customer wants? And basically nobody knew if the customer really wanted what they were doing after all. So it basically just reinforced the dialogue and made them contact the customer and ask, but do you really want that part as it is, right? Or for instance, being it black and not white. So I've seen these dialogues going on internally saying that we were doing these things, but we didn't really ask for a long time ourselves why we were doing those things.
What do you think, using such a platform, or this one, or maybe another one we saw yesterday, to discuss with customers and eliciting together the requirements? Because my own experience is that customer wants the better product, but it doesn't know about the R&D efforts, the trade-off, the conflicts, and so on. So would it be a way to disseminate your work in company?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, but in terms of a customer perspective, I think it's necessary to have a dialogue, but it's also necessary to understand, is it like the maximum we're aiming at, or there is an optimum solution that we could propose to our customer. I think it's also a very important dialogue, because we always tend to see a sustainability objective of something either to minimize to the 0 or maximize to the 100. But is 100 like the optimum for us if we are making trade-offs on all the rest of criteria, right? So there is this dialogue to have in the company. Is 100 what we want? Or can we be okay with 60% of that performance while achieving all the rest, right? And if you would like to repeat your question about companies' implementation.
Yeah, the question is that, yeah, you're right that maybe relaxing constraints, but if you have a platform or visual representations highlighting the conflict decisions, or what are the consequences of relaxing these constraints, might be useful to elicitate and formulate right requirements. I mean, and so reducing the number of trade-off and.
Yeah, I'll write it down, because this is something that could be useful in the future research. Yeah.
Good. And maybe the last question. So, what's the role of experimentation in dealing with trade-off?
Yeah, experimentation in real life settings, or what is this question?
I think so.
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, I would say that this trade-off logic that we're trying to propose based on those criteria we have discovered through the literature review is to reinforce internal learning of designers about what kind of designs they are proposing and what they're trying to achieve with those designs. So I guess the sort of the overall aim or the best sort of outcome we could hope for is that they would be able to select an option which is sort of very optimal or very or maximizes benefits on most of the sustainability criteria they have considered in the decision-making process. This is just the way I understand the question.
Right, thank you. Let's move on to Romina. Maybe we have time for 2 or 3 questions. And the first one is, Romina, did you manage to find out which attributes of the product are most influential on users' perception? And do they...
Thanks, Daria, for the question. I think is her. Yes, this paper refers as yours almost at least to 1 year ago. So in this year we developed really the argument, and in my last paper and work, I identified which attributes can really guide the behavior and which attributes are linked to certain activators for guiding sustainable behaviors. Yes, the work goes on in this direction, and also to answer to Yuri Giovanni, that is my other question. The work is going on expanding the possible case studies under the same lens, so how the material aesthetic change could activate sustainable behaviors in consumers, and under this lens we are trying to not trying, in reality is already done, but to find out activators and for sustainable and activators for unsustainable behavior, just referring to the aesthetic perception of the material, but we are aware that also the communication level or the form level, the shape and the different products have different meanings, but in this work we are referring just to the perception of the material. For example, in the packaging area, referring to the perception of material instead of communication, graphic and form has a really high impact because user just refer to what are in touch to, does not read an extensive guide on how to throw the product away, but the response is really more immediate and insightful for the user. So we are trying to explore and expand the research, and my PhD final dissertation will be about the general topic on how materials can drive sustainable behaviors. So this was
good. Very promising, very promising. So time is running, so it's time to join the closing sessions. I'd like to thank very much all of the presenters for the quality of your papers and the question and answers. And also, thanks very much, the audience, for the interesting debates. So thank you all, and rendezvous at the closing sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.